The day they read my husband's will was not the day I lost him. It was the day I discovered I had never truly known him or the daughter I had raised. The lawyer's voice, a dry drone in the stuffy Aspen office, announced the disposition of our 42 years together. The grand Victorian home, the portfolio of assets, the life I had so carefully curated, all of it, was to go to my daughter Clara and her husband Julian. I saw them from the corner of my eye, Clara's manicured hand clutching Julian's, their shared smile, a brief sharp slash of triumph they barely tried to conceal. My own hands remained folded in my lap, my posture as straight and unyielding as it had been through every one of Richard's business dinners and political fundraisers. He was a man of logic. There had to be a provision for me. The lawyer cleared his throat. And to my wife, Eleanor Vance, I leave the parcel of land and its structure located in the San Juan Mountains acquired 5 years prior. The silence that followed was a physical weight. Clara was the first to break it, her voice laced with a performative concern that turned my stomach. That's all? The lawyer adjusted his spectacles, refusing to meet my gaze. The property consists of 40 acres and a cabin which Mr. Vance purchased. 40 acres and a cabin. Richard had never once mentioned a property in the mountains, not in 5 years. The shock was a cold stone in my gut, but my face remained a placid mask. Of course Mother can live with us, Clara declared, her magnanimity as false as the pearls at her throat. Julian's nod was stiff, his smile a thin, bloodless line that never touched his cold eyes. 2 weeks later, their generosity had curdled into its true form. I was a ghost in my own home, confined to a guest room, expected to prepare meals and vanish whenever they entertained. I was no longer the lady of the house. I was a piece of unwanted furniture they had inherited. The breaking point came after a dinner party I had cooked for. As I was loading the dishwasher with plates they had left for me, Julian cornered me, swirling a brandy in one of Richard's crystal snifters. "This arrangement is untenable, Eleanor," he said, his voice smooth and condescending. "Clara and I require our privacy." "I do my best to stay out of your way," I replied, my voice quiet as I continued my work. "It isn't enough." His tone hardened. Richard knew exactly what he was doing. He left you that hovel in the mountains because he knew after he was gone that you were incapable of surviving on your own. He carried you your entire life. You've never worked, never balanced a checkbook. You were a pampered housewife, and now you expect us to carry you too. The cruelty was so blatant, so undisguised, it stole my breath. I straightened my back, aching, and turned to face him just as Clara entered the kitchen. I looked to my daughter, my only child, for a lifeline. She just sighed, a sound of weary impatience. "Mom, Julian is right. We think it's time for you to go see your property. It's time you learned to be independent." The next morning, my suitcases, the ones Richard had bought me for our anniversary trip to Italy, were packed and waiting by the front door. Julian pressed an envelope into my hand. It contained a key and a hand-drawn map. "Don't bother coming back until you've figured out how to provide for yourself," he sneered. "This isn't a charity." Clara hugged me, her body rigid, and whispered, "It's for the best, Mom. You need this." And just like that, at 68 years old, I was exiled. I packed my belongings into the sedan Richard had insisted I have and started the long drive from Aspen into the remote, snow-dusted peaks of the Rockies. For the first 100 miles, rage and grief warred within me, blurring the winding mountain roads into a watercolor of despair. How could Richard have left me so exposed? How could Clara discard me like an old coat? The drive took nearly 8 hours, the last 40 minutes, on a treacherous, unpaved track that climbed ever higher into the wilderness. With every mile, my hope dwindled. I was being sent to a dilapidated shack to live out my remaining years in forgotten squalor. When I finally arrived, dusk was painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and orange, casting long skeletal shadows across a structure that was worse than I had feared. It was a 2-story log cabin, but its porch sagged like a broken jaw. Shingles were missing from the roof in jagged patches, and the windows were dark, vacant eyes. Some cracked, others boarded over entirely. "Oh, Richard," I whispered into the biting wind, the words a prayer and a curse. "What have you done to me?" Exhaustion warred with a primal fear, but the freezing wind left me no choice. I gathered my courage, my gloved hand trembling as I fitted the old iron key into the lock. It resisted groaning in protest but finally turned. The heavy wooden door swung inward on complaining hinges, opening into a pitch-black void that smelled of dust and disuse. I fumbled along the wall, my fingers searching for a light switch, expecting the damp chill of a long-abandoned space. My hand found a modern flat switch. I flicked it up. Light flooded the space, and I froze in the doorway, my suitcase slipping from my numb fingers to thud heavily on the floor. The sight before me was so profoundly disconnected from the derelict exterior that my mind struggled to process it. I wasn't in a shack. I was standing in a spacious open-plan living room that looked like a feature in an architectural magazine. Sleek modern furniture was arranged artfully on a plush cream-colored area rug. The walls were lined with books, the floors were gleaming hardwood, and a state-of-the-art kitchen with stainless steel appliances and granite countertops gleamed under recessed lighting. It was a space of unexpected, impossible luxury. But it wasn't the opulence that stole my breath and sent a spike of pure ice through my veins. It was the dining table. It was set for one. Beside a plate lay a copy of the Denver Post folded neatly. A half-empty ceramic mug sat beside it, a faint wisp of steam still rising from the dark liquid within. Someone had been here moments ago. Perhaps they were still here. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I backed away from the table, my eyes scanning the shadows in the corners of the vast room. "Hello?" I called out, my voice a pathetic, trembling thing. "Is anyone here?" The only answer was the low electric hum of the refrigerator. Moving with a caution I didn't know I possessed, I crept toward the table. The coffee in the mug was still warm to the touch. I picked up the newspaper, my hands shaking so violently I could barely read the masthead. The date printed at the top was from 2 days ago, 3 days after Richard's funeral. The world tilted on its axis. A roaring sound filled my ears. I stumbled back, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a scream. This wasn't just a secret hideaway. It was something else entirely. My gaze fell upon an open leather-bound journal next to the plate. The handwriting was instantly, achingly familiar. It was Richard's precise, slanted script. The entry at the top of the page began, "Eleanor will be here soon. I pray she can forgive me for this deception." My knees buckled. Deception. The word echoed in the silent room. Trembling, I sank into a chair, my eyes devouring the words. The letter, for that's what it was a confession and a warning. It unspooled a nightmare I couldn't have conceived. Richard wasn't dead. The heart attack, the funeral, my all-consuming grief, it had all been a meticulously staged performance. 5 years ago, while auditing development funds for the city of Aspen, he had stumbled upon a massive money laundering scheme, a conspiracy of shell corporations and fraudulent contracts funneling millions in public funds into private offshore accounts. The architect of the scheme was Julian, and his willing, knowledgeable accomplice was our daughter Clara. He wrote of how he began quietly gathering evidence, only to realize he was being followed. His phones tapped, their home bugged. He purchased this property as a safe house, deliberately disguising its exterior to repel any curious visitors. Here, he had compiled everything he needed to expose them. 3 months ago, he'd learned they were no longer content with him being a potential threat. They had made plans to eliminate him permanently. He had to disappear first to make them believe they had won. "Your grief had to be real, Abby," he wrote, using his old pet name for me. "It was the only way they would believe I was truly gone. Watching you suffer has been the greatest agony of my life." He explained the will. He knew Julian's greed and contempt for me would ensure I was forced out of the Aspen house. He knew they would send me here to this place they believed was a worthless ruin. This cabin was meant to be my sanctuary, not my prison. My trembling fingers turned the page to find complex diagrams of the cabin, revealing hidden passages behind walls and a secret room concealed behind the grand stone fireplace in the living room. Just as I processed this, a floorboard creaked in the hallway leading deeper into the house. I wasn't alone. My breath caught in my throat. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but where I was miles from civilization, in a house that was a paradox of safety and terror. My hand shot out and grabbed the only thing that felt like a weapon, a heavy cast-iron fire poker leaning against the stone hearth. Holding it like a club, its weight a pathetic comfort, I listened. The silence stretched thick and menacing, broken only by the frantic pounding of my own heart. "Who's there?" I called, my voice betraying me with a quaver. Silence. Taking a shuddering breath, I forced myself to move. I crept down the hallway the poker held out before me. The doors were open. One room was a study, papers spread across a mahogany desk, a laptop open and glowing. Another was a bedroom, the sheets on the bed rumpled as if someone had just risen. In the closet hung men's clothing in Richard's size, but in rugged styles. I'd never seen him wear flannel shirts, durable denim hiking boots. He had been living a different life here, the life of a man I didn't know. My eyes were drawn back to the massive stone fireplace in the main room, remembering the diagrams in his letter. I ran my hands over the cool stones, searching for an imperfection, a seam, anything. My fingers found it, a single stone slightly recessed with a different texture. I pushed. With a low, grinding groan of hidden mechanisms, a section of the fireplace swung inward, revealing a dark, narrow opening. The air that wafted out was cool and smelled of electronics and old paper. Steeling myself, I stepped through into a room that defied belief. It was a command center. One wall was covered in a massive corkboard, a spider web of strings connecting photographs, financial statements, and blueprints. I saw Julian's face smiling at a charity gala, connected by a red string to a grainy surveillance photo of him shaking hands with a man I recognized from the news, a notorious figure with ties to organized crime. Prominently featured was my daughter Clara, her signature adorning documents that were clearly fraudulent contracts. Stacked on a metal desk were audio cassette tapes, each neatly labeled with dates and initials. One read JMCM, finalizing the retirement plan. Julian Morrow. Clara Morrow, my daughter. They had planned my husband's murder. A sweep of headlights across the room's single high window jolted me back to the present. My heart leaped into my throat. I rushed to the window and peered through a slit in the blackout curtain. Two black SUVs, their engines silent, had rolled up the gravel drive. Men in dark clothing emerged, moving with a fluid, predatory purpose toward the cabin. They weren't here to ask questions. I finally understood the full, monstrous scope of their plan. They never expected me to stay. They expected the dilapidated exterior to send me fleeing back to Aspen defeated, or for the wilderness to claim me. When neither happened, they came to finish the job themselves and to retrieve whatever evidence Richard had left behind. Panic gave way to a strange, icy calm. They thought I was a weak, useless old woman. Even Richard, in his own way, had sought to protect me by keeping me in the dark. But in his letter, he had given me the tools to survive. I looked from the evidence on the desk to the diagrams I still clutched in my hand. Run, hide, fight. For the first time in my life, the choice was entirely mine. I heard the crunch of boots on the porch, the subtle click of the front door handle being tested. There was no time. I grabbed a small backpack from a hook on the wall and swept the audio tapes and a thick leather-bound ledger from the desk into it. The diagrams showed an escape route, an old mining tunnel accessed through a panel in the back of the pantry. As I slipped out of the secret room, closing the stone door behind me, I saw a small red button on the wall beside it, exactly where Richard's drawing indicated. A handwritten note was taped below. 30 seconds. Seal and contain. The sound of shattering glass erupted from the living room. They were in. Without a second of hesitation, my finger jabbed the red button. A calm, recorded voice. Richard's voice filled the air. Emergency protocol initiated. Containment sequence active. I scrambled into the pantry, found the panel, and pulled it open, revealing a dark, earthy-smelling tunnel. Behind me, I heard the heavy metallic clang of steel shutters slamming down over the windows and doors. I dove into the tunnel, pulling the heavy wooden entrance shut just as the first muffled explosion rocked the cabin's foundation. It was a deep, concussive thud designed not to destroy but to seal, to trap. The hunt had begun, but they were hunting a woman who no longer existed. The tunnel was narrow and cold, smelling of damp earth and something metallic. Dim emergency lights set into the floor every 20 feet provided just enough of a glow to see by. Richard had thought of everything. The passage sloped gently downward, the air growing colder as I moved deeper into the mountain's embrace. Above me, I could hear the muffled shouts of the trapped men, their rage and confusion a distant, satisfying rumble. The tunnel opened into a small concrete-lined room, a hidden nexus within the mountain itself. My jaw dropped. It was another surveillance hub. A bank of monitors showed feeds from tiny hidden cameras all over the cabin property. I watched mesmerized as the men I had trapped tried futilely to break through the steel-shuttered windows. One of them was on a radio, his voice a frantic squawk I couldn't decipher. They were calling for backup, but they were sealed in Richard's tomb. Hanging on a hook was the backpack I'd seen in the secret room, and I now understood it was a go-bag. Inside, my shaking hands found bundles of cash, a passport with my photograph, but a name I didn't recognize, Catherine Schmidt, and a small, heavy automatic pistol. Richard knew I'd occasionally gone target shooting with him years ago, but I'd never imagined holding a weapon meant for anything other than a paper target. Tucked in a side pocket were several encrypted thumb drives labeled simply "Copy Primary Evidence." A laminated map showed the full extent of the tunnel system. One route led to an exit nearly a mile away, emerging in a dense aspen grove. Another connected to what was marked as an old ranger station 5 miles north. It was labeled Secure Location B. My best chance was to get to that ranger station and wait. But wait for what? For these men's associates to find me. They were here to find evidence and eliminate a witness. My mind, sharpened by adrenaline, saw a new path. If they believed they had accomplished one of those goals, perhaps they wouldn't search so hard for the other. On one of the monitors, I watched as they finally breached the stone fireplace, discovering the now empty secret room. "It's gone!" one of them yelled. "The old lady must have it. Find her, burn this place to the ground if you have to." My blood ran cold. They wouldn't just leave. They would destroy everything to cover their tracks. Tucked inside the backpack with the gun was a satellite phone. My fingers, clumsy with fear, dialed the single number programmed into its memory. It rang twice before a voice answered, a voice I hadn't heard in months, a voice I thought I'd never hear again. "Abby, is that you? Thank God." "Richard," I choked out, tears of relief and rage streaming down my face. "They're here, they're trying to—" "I know, I've been monitoring. Did you activate the containment protocol?" His voice was tight with an anxiety that mirrored my own. "Yes, they're trapped, but they said they'll burn the cabin." "You can't stay there. In the go bag, there's a small GPS tracker. Activate it. I'll have a team from Denver come for you. They can be there in 3 hours. Just hide until they arrive." I should have felt relief. I should have been desperate for rescue. But Julian's sneering face swam in my memory. "Incapable of surviving on your own." Clara's cold dismissal. "It's time you learned to be independent." Something inside me, a core of steel I never knew I possessed, solidified in that moment. "No," I said, my voice firm, devoid of the tremor that had plagued it for weeks. "No, Abby, you're in mortal danger." "I am going to Denver, Richard," I interrupted. "I'm going to see Agent Miller. Our daughter and her husband tried to have me murdered tonight. I'm not hiding in a tunnel waiting for rescue. I'm going to deliver this evidence myself, and I am going to watch them pay." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "You always were so much stronger than anyone ever knew," he finally said, his voice thick with a new emotion, awe. "All right, but be careful. They will be looking for you." After we hung up, I located the small black GPS tracker at the bottom of the bag. I walked to the entrance of the tunnel leading north, laid the device on the stone floor, and brought the butt of the heavy pistol down on it with all my strength. It shattered into plastic and electronic dust. My ties to the past were severed. I was no longer a wife waiting for her husband's protection. I was Catherine Schmidt, a woman with a mission. I shouldered the backpack, checked the map one last time, and began the long walk through the darkness, my every step taking me further from the woman I had been and closer to the woman I was forced to become. The Montana night was a vast, indifferent cathedral of stars, its silence broken only by the rustle of unseen wildlife and the thrumming of my own blood in my ears. The hike to the small settlement marked on Richard's map was 8 agonizing miles through dense forest and over rocky inclines my city-soft legs were wholly unprepared for. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every snap of a twig sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through me. I was no longer a grieving widow. I was prey. But with that terror came a clarity I had never known. I thought of Julian's sneering face as he cast me out of Clara's cold dismissal. They believed I would break. Perhaps for decades I had believed it too. But with every painful step, with every lungful of thin, freezing air, a part of me that had been dormant for a lifetime was awakening. It was a core of pure, unadulterated anger, and it was the only thing keeping me moving. By midday, I finally stumbled onto a dirt service road that, according to the map, led to the settlement of Evergreen. It was little more than a dozen weathered buildings huddled around a crossroads dwarfed by the majestic peaks surrounding it. I did my best to smooth my hair and brush the dirt from my clothes, composing a plausible story in my mind. A tourist, a broken-down car, a dead cell phone. Simple, forgettable. The general store's screen door creaked as I entered, announcing my arrival to the single occupant, an old man with a weathered face, who looked up from his newspaper in surprise. "Help you, ma'am?" he asked, his eyes taking in my disheveled state. "Car trouble," I said, forcing a weary smile. "My rental gave out a few miles back down the road. Is there a phone I could use?" He nodded sympathetically toward a payphone on the wall. "Happens all the time. No cell service to speak of out here." As I fumbled in my pocket for change, my eyes scanned a bulletin board plastered with local notices. Bake sales, lost pets, ranch hands for hire. A freshly posted flyer printed on glossy paper that stood out from the rest caught my eye. My blood turned to ice. It was a picture of me, a smiling photo Richard had taken on our last anniversary. Above it, in bold red letters, was the word, "Missing." My own face stared back at me. The text below was a masterpiece of calculated cruelty. It described me as a 68-year-old woman, Eleanor Vance, suffering from the early stages of dementia, who had wandered away from her family's mountain property. It warned that I might be confused, paranoid, and prone to telling elaborate, untrue stories about my family. It listed Julian as the contact, a deeply concerned son-in-law, desperate for his mother-in-law's safe return. The final line was a gut punch. A substantial cash reward is offered for any information leading to her location. They hadn't just made me a fugitive, they had weaponized the entire community against me. They had preemptively discredited any story I might tell, painting me as a delusional old woman. If I went to the police, who would they believe? A confused woman with a wild tale of conspiracy, or a wealthy, respected businessman with a documented history of concern for his mentally ill relative? "Just came in this morning," the store owner commented, noticing my fixed gaze. "Some fella in a fancy black SUV put him up all over the county. Sad business. Said his mother-in-law just got lost in her own mind. They've got private search teams combing the woods for her." I forced myself to murmur something sympathetic, turning my face away so he couldn't see the terror in my eyes. The bell over the door jingled and I tensed, but it was just an elderly woman in a faded denim jacket, her gray hair in a practical braid. Waiting for a tow truck was no longer an option. The man in the fancy black SUV could return at any moment. The storekeeper, trying to be helpful, might even call Julian himself. As the woman finished her purchase and headed back outside, I followed on impulse. "Excuse me," I said, my voice barely a whisper. She turned her blue eyes sharp and intelligent, squinting at me in the harsh sunlight. I'm in some trouble. My car broke down and I need to get to Kalispell. I'd be happy to pay you for a ride. She studied my face for a long, unnerving moment, her gaze missing nothing. I could see her weighing the stranger before her against the flyer she had undoubtedly just seen inside. This was it. She would either turn me away or worse, turn me in. My son's the one who runs the tow service, but he's out on a long-haul call, she said, her voice raspy but kind. I'm not heading to Kalispell myself today, but you look more hunted than you do lost. She looked from my face to the door of the store and back again, a decision hardening in her eyes. My name is Martha. My ranch is just a couple miles up the road. You can wait there. My nephew's dropping by with supplies this afternoon. He lives just outside Kalispell and can give you a lift. It was a risk putting my life in this stranger's hands, but the alternative was waiting for Julian's men to find me. I nodded, a wave of gratitude so profound it almost brought me to my knees. Thank you, I breathed. We drove in her ancient, rattling pickup truck, the engine complaining as we bumped along a dirt road that wound away from the settlement. I gave her the most believable version of my cover story, a wildlife photographer from Minneapolis, separated from her group. She listened with a non-committal hum, her eyes on the road, and I had the distinct feeling she didn't believe a word of it. Her ranch was a modest, well-kept homestead with a large red barn and a corral nestled in a valley that was both beautiful and utterly isolated. As we pulled up the long gravel driveway, I saw another vehicle parked in front of the house, a sleek silver sedan with tinted windows that was jarringly out of place. Well, look at that. Looks like my nephew Tommy's here early, Martha remarked cheerfully, but a cold dread was already coiling in my stomach. As we got out of the truck, the front door of the ranch house opened. My daughter Clara stepped onto the porch. She was dressed in an expensive cashmere coat, looking as poised and elegant as ever. Her face, initially arranged in a pleasant smile for Martha's nephew, froze as she saw me. The mask of civility shattered her expression, shifting in a horrifying instant from shock to disbelief, and then to a cold reptilian fury. For a heartbeat that stretched into an eternity, we stared at each other across the 20 yards of frozen ground, the mother she had sent to her death, and the daughter who had betrayed her. Then her hand moved a swift, deliberate motion toward the designer handbag slung over her shoulder. I knew with a certainty that defied all reason what she was reaching for. "Martha, get down!" I screamed, shoving the older woman with all my strength. We stumbled and fell behind the solid bulk of her pickup truck just as the first crack of a gunshot echoed through the valley. A chunk of wood exploded from the porch railing where we had been standing seconds before. "What in the name of God?" Martha gasped from the ground, her face pale with shock. "That's my daughter." I said the words, tasting like poison as I scrambled to my knees, peering under the truck's chassis. "And she's trying to kill me." In the distance, I heard the growing rumble of engines, the black SUVs undoubtedly called here as reinforcements. The trap was closing. "Mom, is that you?" Clara's voice called out, sickeningly sweet and laced with feigned concern. "Thank God we found you. We've been so worried." The performance was for Martha's benefit, a chilling piece of theater. "Stay down," I whispered to Martha, whose initial shock was already hardening into a steely resolve that surprised me. "Is there another way out of here, a back road?" She fumbled in her pocket, producing a set of keys. "The barn," she said, her voice low and urgent. "My late husband's old Jeep is in there. It connects to the back pasture and a network of old logging roads." The rumble of the SUVs grew louder. I could see them turning onto the long driveway. "When I say go, we run for the barn, zigzag." I commanded, the words coming from a part of me I didn't know existed. "Now go." We scrambled to our feet and ran. Another shot rang out, kicking up a spray of gravel at my heels. Martha was surprisingly agile, keeping pace as we sprinted for the barn's large side door. We burst inside, the air thick with the smell of hay and old machinery. "There," she pointed to a vehicle covered by a dusty tarp in the far corner, while I ripped the cover away to reveal a vintage battle-scarred Jeep. Martha slid a heavy wooden beam into place, barring the door we had just entered. I slid behind the wheel, jammed the key into the ignition, and offered a silent prayer. The engine sputtered once, twice, then roared to life with a deafening cough. "You should stay," I told her, my hands gripping the wheel. Tell them I forced you. She fixed me with an incredulous glare. Young lady, nobody shoots at guests on my property. She reached under her seat and pulled out a weathered double-barreled shotgun. Besides, she said with a grim smile, I know these mountains better than they do. Shouts erupted from outside as the men began to pound on the barricaded door. I threw the jeep into gear and aimed it at the huge, flimsy double doors at the rear of the barn. We exploded through them in a shower of splintered wood fishtailing onto a dirt track that led away from the house and towards the dense tree line. In the rearview mirror, I saw them, the men pouring out of the barn, and Clara, her face a mask of incandescent rage as she raised her pistol to fire again. Left at the fork by the old creek bed, Martha shouted over the roar of the engine, bracing herself with one hand on the dashboard while the shotgun lay across her lap. They won't know these old logging roads. I wrenched the wheel, sending the jeep sliding through mud and gravel onto a path that was barely visible. We plunged into a labyrinth of unmarked tracks, a maze of dense pine and aspen that swallowed us whole. The powerful SUVs were no match for the agile jeep on this terrain. We were a ghost in the wilderness, and Martha was my guide. For what felt like hours, she barked directions, navigating by landmarks. Only she could recognize a particular rock formation, a lightning-scarred pine, the curve of a distant ridge. The jarring ride rattled every bone in my body, but I was too focused to feel it. Only when we had put miles of dense forest between us and the ranch did she finally say, All right, pull over here under these pines. From our vantage point on a high ridge, we could see for miles. And there in the distance, a thick black pillar of smoke coiled into the pristine blue sky, rising from the exact location of her home. They were burning it, erasing every trace. My home, she said, her voice quiet and thick with a sorrow that cut through me. Guilt washed over me in a sickening wave. Martha, I am so sorry. I never meant to bring this. She cut me off. Her jaw set, her eyes still fixed on the smoke. Been meaning to downsize anyway, she said, her voice rough. But then she turned to me, her gaze hard as granite. But now it's personal. Now I think you'd better tell me exactly why your daughter is trying to put you in the ground. And so, as we navigated the backwoods of Colorado, the story spilled out of me. Richard's faked death, the conspiracy, Julian and Clara's monstrous betrayal, the evidence I carried in the backpack beside me. She listened without interruption, her weathered face an unreadable mask. When I finished, she was silent for a long time. And I thought the soap operas my sister watches were far-fetched, she finally said, shaking her head. A raw, hysterical laugh escaped my throat. You have no idea. We need to ditch this jeep, I said, as we finally approached the outskirts of a small town called Columbia Falls. They'll have the license plate out everywhere by now. Martha agreed, directing me to a small, nondescript diner with an attached motel. My nephew Pete runs this place. He's a good boy. Discreet. The diner was nearly empty. Pete, a burly man in his 40s with his aunt's sharp eyes, took one look at our disheveled state and wordlessly ushered us into a back office. They burned the ranch down. Petey, Martha told him, no preamble. We need a room, no questions, no paperwork, and a phone that can't be traced. To his everlasting credit, he simply nodded, grabbing a key from a pegboard. Room 12, around back. Nobody will see you. You need anything else, Aunt Martha? Some food, and keep your eyes peeled for men who don't belong here. In the sterile anonymity of the motel room, I finally took a moment to look in the mirror. A stranger stared back at me, a wild-eyed woman with twigs in her gray hair and a fierce, hunted look in her eyes. I hardly recognized the suburban grandmother I had been only days ago. While Martha coordinated with Pete, I used the burner phone he'd provided to call the number for Agent Miller. It went to a curt voicemail. I left a cryptic message. This is a message for Agent Miller regarding Richard Vance. I have what he was looking for. I am at the Pinecone Motel in Columbia Falls. Come alone. Hours crept by. Every passing car on the highway made me flinch. Every footstep in the gravel outside sent my hand flying to the pistol in my bag. Finally, a sharp knock came at the door. I gestured for Martha to stand back my own gun, now in my hand, my heart hammering. "Who is it?" I called. "Agent Miller, FBI," a calm voice replied. "I believe you have something for me." I cracked the door, the chain still on. He was in his 50s with a stern, professional demeanor, and he held up his badge. It looked real, but I couldn't be sure. "Prove it," I said, my voice tight. "Prove you know Richard." A faint smile touched his lips. "He said you'd be cautious. He told me to ask you about the Santorini sunset." The breath left my body in a rush. It was a code, a memory. On our 30th anniversary on a cliffside in Santorini, Richard had whispered that the sunset was so perfect, it must be a secret between the two of us and God. No one else could have known that phrase. I unlatched the chain. Agent Miller stepped inside, his eyes quickly assessing the room, nodding respectfully to Martha. "You've been through hell, Mrs. Vance," he said. "Frank Richard has been working with my office for over a year. The evidence you're carrying, it's the final piece. We were building a case, but we needed incontrovertible proof linking Blackwell directly to the offshore accounts. Those audio tapes, I believe, are it." Why was I kept in the dark? I asked, the bitterness I felt still sharp. Why was I left to be a target? "That was Richard's call," Miller said, his gaze steady and unapologetic. "He insisted, to protect you. If you had known your behavior after his death might have tipped them off. Your genuine grief was your cover. He never intended for them to come after you. He planned to have you brought into protection before they ever realized what he'd left at the cabin. Your daughter and son-in-law accelerated the timeline. Now," he said, his tone shifting, "we move. We take down this entire operation starting tomorrow at dawn." "I want to be there," I said, the words coming out with a steely resolve that surprised even me. "When you arrest them. When you arrest Clara." Miller shook his head immediately. "Absolutely not, Mrs. Vance. It's an active and potentially hostile takedown. You're a civilian witness, and my primary responsibility is your safety." "They tried to murder me," I countered, my voice low and fierce. "They burned down an innocent woman's home just for helping me. They hunted me through the mountains. I am not a fragile witness to be hidden away, Agent Miller. I have earned the right to see this end." I met his gaze unflinching and saw a flicker of something, not pity but respect. After a tense moment, we reached a compromise. I would not be on the front line, but I could be nearby observing from a secure vehicle with another agent. It was enough. The pre-dawn drive back to Aspen was surreal. We traveled in a convoy of dark, unmarked government vehicles, a bitter irony that was not lost on me. As we entered the familiar manicured streets of my old life, every landmark was a ghost. The gourmet market where I'd shopped for 40 years, the park where I'd pushed a laughing, pigtailed Clara on the swings, the quiet library where I volunteered. They were all settings from a life that belonged to someone else, now a woman who no longer existed. We parked 2 blocks from my former home, nestled between other luxury SUVs in the sleeping, affluent neighborhood. Agent Miller handed me a pair of powerful binoculars and a bulletproof vest, which I donned without protest. "Agent Rivera will stay with you," he said, indicating the sharp-eyed woman in the driver's seat. "Do not exit the vehicle for any reason." Then he was gone, melting into the shadows with his team. Through the binoculars, my house, my home, looked serene and beautiful in the pale morning light. The rose bushes I had so carefully tended were still there, dormant for the winter. The stained glass window I'd commissioned for the foyer caught the first rays of dawn. It was a picture of domestic tranquility about to be violently torn apart. The radio in our vehicle crackled with coded chatter, then a single sharp command, "Execute." The next 60 seconds were a blur of controlled chaos. Teams of black-clad agents swarmed the property from all sides. The heavy oak front door splintered under a battering ram. Shouts of "FBI search warrant" shattered the morning quiet. I saw agents securing the startled household staff, leading them onto the lawn. Then Julian appeared, dragged out in a silk bathrobe, his face a mask of incandescent rage and disbelief. The powerful, condescending man who had dismissed me as a worthless burden now looked small and pathetic, his hands cuffed behind his back. I held my breath, scanning the windows for Clara. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Then Rivera tensed beside me as the radio crackled urgently. We have a runner back of the property heading east. I swung the binoculars just in time to see a dark figure vaulting the back fence with desperate agility. Sophia. She was sprinting through the neighbor's manicured yard. Suspect is heading for Franklin Street, the radio squawked. Rivera started the engine without a word. Hold on, she said, and the SUV lurched forward, tires squealing as we whipped around the block to intercept. We rounded the corner just as Clara burst from between two houses, her panicked flight bringing her directly into our path. Rivera slammed on the brakes, blocking the street. For one terrible frozen moment, she stood caught in our headlights like a cornered animal, her hair wild, her face pale, her designer jogging suit spattered with mud. And then she saw me in the passenger seat. Recognition dawned and her expression transformed. The fear and panic were consumed by a wave of pure, concentrated hatred so venomous it was almost a physical force. It was the look I had seen at Martha's ranch, but 100 times more potent. In that instant, I knew with absolute certainty that the daughter I had loved and raised was truly gone, replaced by this venomous stranger. She turned to flee again, but it was too late. Agents were closing in from all sides. With a final desperate snarl, she reached into the pocket of her jacket. "Gun!" an agent screamed, time distorted, stretching into a slow-motion horror. I saw weapons being drawn, heard commands being shouted. I saw Clara's hand emerge with something dark and metallic. Agent Rivera yelled my name, her arm flying out to push my head down. I closed my eyes, bracing for the inevitable. A single sharp crack of a gunshot echoed through the street. When I dared to look up, Clara was on the ground, agents swarming her. She was alive, writhing. The shot had been a warning. On the pavement beside her lay not a gun, but her cell phone. As they hauled her to her feet and cuffed her, her eyes found mine through the windshield. The hatred was gone, replaced by a hollow, chilling emptiness that hurt more than her rage ever could. Agent Miller returned to our vehicle a few minutes later, his expression grim but satisfied. "Blackwell is already screaming for his lawyer. Your daughter hasn't said a word." He got in and the SUV pulled away from the curb, leaving the flashing lights and yellow tape behind. "There's a plane waiting for you at a private airfield. It's time to see your husband." The airfield was a discreet, high-security facility tucked away from the main airport. A sleek government jet waited on the tarmac, its engines a low hum in the crisp morning air. As I walked toward it, each step felt heavy, unreal. I was about to face the ghost I had mourned, the man whose deception, however well-intentioned, had ripped my world apart. I paused at the foot of the boarding stairs, a wave of conflicting emotions washing over me. Relief, fury, a profound sense of loss for the 42 years of trust that now lay in ashes. "Take your time," Miller said gently beside me. "This isn't easy." I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and ascended the stairs. The interior of the jet was functional and Spartan, and there, rising from a seat in the back, was Richard. He was thinner, his face etched with lines of strain. I'd never seen his hair more gray than I remembered. He was dressed in the simple, rugged clothes of a man I didn't know, a stranger inhabiting my husband's body. But his eyes were the same, and they were fixed on me with a desperate, hopeful uncertainty. "Abby," he said, his voice cracking on the old pet name. I stood frozen in the aisle, the words locked in my throat. A hysterical laugh bubbled up. "Do I look well, Richard?" I finally managed the sound, sharp and brittle. "After I mourned you, after I buried an empty casket, after our daughter tried to have me murdered while you hid in the mountains." He flinched, the words landing like physical blows. "I deserve that," he whispered. "All of it. Please sit." The agents moved discreetly to the front of the plane, giving us a semblance of privacy. I sank into a seat across the aisle from him, a deliberate chasm between us. "Explain," I said, my voice cold. He took a shaky breath. By the time I understood the full scope of it, that Clara was a willing participant, they were already watching me. Our house was bugged, our phones, everything. Telling you would have been signing your death warrant. They would have seen you as a co-conspirator. The only way to protect you was for you to be a genuine grieving widow. The only way for the evidence to be safe was for me to be dead. And the pain I went through, the grief that nearly broke me, that was just acceptable collateral damage in your grand plan. It was torture, Abby, he insisted, his eyes pleading. Every day I had agents sending me reports. I knew when you couldn't eat when you spent nights crying. It was a hell I wouldn't wish on anyone, but it was the only way. You underestimated me. I said the truth of it, landing with the force of a revelation. You, Julie, and Clara. You all saw a fragile woman who needed to be protected or discarded. You never once thought to trust me, to fight alongside me. His face crumpled. You're right. It was my greatest mistake. I was trying to protect the woman I married, and I was too blind to see the warrior she had become. The jet's engines roared, pressing us back into our seats as we lifted off the ground. Below us, Aspen shrank away, a glittering mirage of a life that was gone forever. We flew in silence for a long time, the unspoken accusations and regrets hanging thick in the air between us. Where are we going? I finally asked. A secure location. A safe house in Idaho on a lake. We'll be there until the trial is over. He hesitated. After that, we can decide what's next. Witness protection, new identities, a new life. A new life. The words sounded hollow. My old life had been built on a foundation of trust that he had systematically dismantled. We weren't the same people who had toasted our 40th anniversary 2 years ago. That couple was gone, perhaps as truly dead as I had believed him to be. The chasm between us wasn't just physical. It was a vast, barren landscape of secrets and pain. I didn't know if we could ever find our way back across it. The safe house was a beautiful lie. It was a charming, secluded cabin on the shores of a vast, glass-clear lake in northern Idaho, surrounded by a sentinel ring of pine-covered mountains. It was peaceful, idyllic, and completely at odds with the silent war being waged within its walls. For 3 weeks, Richard and I existed in a state of suspended animation, two planets held in a fragile, distant orbit around a shared tragedy. We were physically together, but emotionally continents apart. We fell into a careful, unspoken routine. I would take long, solitary walks along the frozen shoreline in the mornings while he made coffee, the aroma filling a space that remained empty of conversation. He would spend his afternoons on secure video calls with federal prosecutors, meticulously preparing his testimony, while I lost myself in the pages of novels left by previous occupants grateful for the escape into other people's lives. Our dinners were quiet, polite affairs, where we discussed the weather, the food, the news, anything and everything, except the two topics that loomed over us, our daughter and our future. He slept in the guest bedroom. It was a boundary I never had to draw. He simply understood that the chasm between us was too wide to cross. Agent Miller provided our only link to the outside world, delivering filtered updates from Aspen. Julian was being held without bail, his extensive international ties making him a significant flight risk. The investigation was widening, ensnaring several city officials and business associates. And Clara Miller told us, had maintained a wall of absolute silence, refusing to cooperate or even speak to the high-powered attorney Julian had hired for her. That single detail struck me with an unexpected pang of grief. It was so quintessentially Clara, the stubborn, iron-willed silence she had used as a weapon in every teenage disagreement, now wielded in the face of federal charges. On the 25th day of our gilded imprisonment, Miller arrived with news that shattered our fragile truce. The preliminary hearing is set for next week, he announced, seated at the rustic dining table. The prosecution's case is strong, but they want to ensure the attempted murder charges stick. To do that, they need you both to testify. Richard nodded, his face grim but resolved. He had been preparing for this. Of course, whatever they need. Miller's gaze shifted to me. My blood ran cold. Both of us. I asked, my voice a thin thread. You mean, I have to get on a stand and testify against my own daughter? His expression was sympathetic but firm. Your first-hand account of the events at Martha's ranch is crucial. It establishes a clear and undeniable intent to kill. Without it, her lawyers could argue she was simply trying to scare you. The words hung in the air. She's my daughter. The phrase was a silent scream in my mind, A lifetime of memories rushing forward, her first steps, her hand in mine on the first day of school, the pride in her eyes at her college graduation, the way she looked on her wedding day. She tried to kill you, Eleanor. Richard reminded me, his voice gentle. Something inside me snapped. I know what she did. I shot back, the sudden vehemence startling all of us. I slammed my hands down on the table, the sharp crack echoing in the silent cabin. I was there, remember? While you were safe in your mountain fortress. I was the one she was shooting at. I was the one who had to run for my life and watch the child I raised try to murder me. The dam of composure I had so carefully maintained for weeks finally broke, and a torrent of rage, grief, and betrayal poured out. I need some air. I choked out, rising so quickly my chair scraped loudly against the floor. I fled outside, the frigid air a welcome shock against my hot face. I walked to the end of the long wooden dock, the icy water below a perfect mirror of the cold, still sky. I sat on the edge, my feet dangling above the abyss, and let the tears come. Minutes later, I sensed Richard's presence. He approached slowly, cautiously, and sat a respectful distance away. For a long time, we just listened to the silence. No one would blame you if you refused, he finally said, his voice quiet. After everything you've been through, no one would expect you to do that to your own child. I turned to look at him, this man who was both my husband and a stranger. Wouldn't you? He met my gaze, and for the first time I saw not a planner or a strategist, but a man as lost as I was. No, he said, his voice thick. Never, Abby. This isn't about loyalty. There is no right answer here. His words, his simple acknowledgement of the impossible choice I faced, loosened the tight band of agony around my chest. But if I don't, I whispered, she might get a lighter sentence. She might one day be free to hurt someone else. That would be the justice system's failure, not yours, he said. Your only responsibility now is to survive this. I looked out over the vast, empty lake, the question tearing me apart. What kind of mother testifies against her own child? But what kind of person stands by and lets a monster walk free, even if that monster has her daughter's face? That night, I called Agent Miller. I need to see it all, I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. Everything you have on her, not just the shooting, I need to understand. The files arrived this next morning on an encrypted hard drive. Boxes upon boxes of digital documents, surveillance photos, and audio recordings. I sequestered myself in my bedroom, telling Richard I needed to be alone. For 2 days, I waded through the cesspool of my daughter's life. It was a methodical, soul-destroying process. I saw a woman I had never known, a person who had been living a parallel life of cold, calculated ambition. The transformation had been gradual, starting years ago, with small, ethical compromises, padding expense reports, manipulating contracts that had slowly metastasized into full-blown criminality. But it was the audio files that finally broke me. I listened to hours of conversations between Clara and Julian, their voices casual and familiar, as they discussed bribes, threats, and money laundering. And then I found the recordings about us. I heard my daughter, in a tone of bored irritation, complain about my presence in her home after Richard's death. I heard her agree with Julian's plan to send me to the worthless cabin in the mountains. And then the final fatal blow. It was a recording from the day before they sent me away. Are you sure about this? Julian asked. About your mother if she finds something? Clara's reply was clear and crisp, untouched by hesitation or doubt. She won't. She's always been weak, Julian. Just a housewife who rode Dad's coattails her entire life. She's never accomplished a single thing on her own. He carried her. She won't be missed. She won't be missed. The words were a shard of ice in my heart. It wasn't just that she was willing to have me killed. It was the utter contempt with which she dismissed my entire existence. My life's work, raising her, supporting our family, creating a home, was nothing to her. I was not a person. I was an inconvenience, a weak, useless appendage to her father's success. Had I so completely failed to show my own child my worth? Or had she simply chosen never to see it? When I finally emerged from the room on the third evening, my decision was made. I found Richard on the porch, a silhouette against the fiery sunset painting the lake. I'll testify, I said, my voice a strange calm after the storm of the past 2 days. He turned, his face etched with concern. I saw the question in his eyes. It's not for revenge, I explained, walking to stand beside him. And it's not out of a sense of duty to the state. I'm doing it because the woman who said those things, who did those things, she isn't my daughter. Not anymore. And she cannot be allowed to hurt anyone else. He nodded slowly, understanding the terrible finality in my voice. You are the strongest person I have ever known, Eleanor, he said, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite name. You always were. I was just too arrogant to see it. For the first time since he had reappeared in my life, I reached out and took his hand. His fingers, calloused from a life I hadn't known, wrapped around mine. It wasn't a gesture of forgiveness, not yet. It was an acknowledgement, a truce. The prosecutor is coming tomorrow to prepare us, I said. After that, whatever happens, we do it together. His hand tightened around mine, a silent promise. As we stood watching the last embers of the sun die behind the mountains, the space between us felt different. It was no longer a chasm of betrayal, but a quiet shared ground of grief. We were two survivors, bound not by the comfortable partnership of our past, but by the brutal, tempering fire of our present. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt like I wasn't facing the darkness alone. The Aspen Federal Courthouse was a monument of cold stone and glass. Its modern austerity a stark contrast to the raw, untamed mountains that served as its backdrop. 6 weeks had passed since our arrival in Idaho. 6 weeks of depositions, legal preparations, and the slow, grinding construction of the case that would define the rest of our lives. Ready? Richard asked, his hand briefly resting on mine as our armored vehicle pulled into the building's secure underground entrance. I smoothed the lapels of the conservative navy blue suit the prosecution team had insisted I wear. It felt like a costume designed to project a credibility I now felt in my very bones. As I'll ever be, I replied. We were escorted to a private witness room where the lead prosecutor, a formidable woman named Elaine Martinez, was waiting. Mrs. Vance. She greeted me, her handshake firm. You're scheduled to be called immediately after the lunch recess. Mr. Vance will be tomorrow morning. She looked me directly in the eye. Remember the strategy. Stick to the facts you know. Answer only the question that is asked. Do not volunteer information. And no matter what he throws at you, do not let their lead counsel get a rise out of you. He will try to paint you as an emotional, vengeful woman. We will win on the facts, not on emotion. Will she be there? I asked the question I had dreaded for weeks. Yes, Martinez said, her expression softening almost imperceptibly. All defendants have the right to face their accusers. If you need a break at any point, you signal me. At precisely 1:30 p.m., a bailiff appeared at the door. They're ready for you, Mrs. Vance. I stood, my legs feeling strangely disconnected from my body. The walk down the long, sterile hallway to the courtroom was the longest of my life. The heavy doors swung open and a hush fell over the packed room. I kept my eyes fixed on the witness stand, a small wooden island in a sea of hostile faces. I felt hundreds of eyes on me, but I refused to search the crowd. After I was sworn in, I finally took my seat and allowed myself to look at the defense table. Julian sat between two expensive lawyers, his face a mask of bored indifference. He was performing for the jury, a man wrongly accused and above it all. And next to him, separated by another attorney, was Clara. My breath caught in my throat. She was thinner, her face sallow, under the harsh fluorescent lights, her expensive suit hanging off her frame. She was staring down at her hands clasped on the table before her. She refused to look at me. For 2 hours, Prosecutor Martinez guided me through my story. My voice, to my own surprise, was steady and clear as I recounted the reading of the will, the eviction from my home, the journey to the cabin, and the discovery of Richard's letter. When we got to the events at Martha's ranch, I described the gunshot, the splinters flying from the porch rail. And you are certain who fired that shot, Mrs. Vance? Martinez asked. Yes, I said, my voice unwavering. It was my daughter, Clara Morrow. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Clara flinch, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. Your witness, Martinez said, returning to her seat. Julian's lead counsel rose. He was a silver-haired man in a tailored suit that probably cost more than my car, and he moved with the languid confidence of a shark. "Mrs. Vance," he began, his voice a smooth, condescending purr, "you have certainly spun a dramatic tale for us. A faked death secret spy lairs assassins in the woods. It's quite the thriller, isn't it?" "I did not find it thrilling," I replied evenly. "I found it terrifying." "Of course," he oozed. "You testified that your own husband, a man you were married to for 42 years, did not trust you enough to tell you any of this. He faked his death and left you to grieve all while keeping you completely in the dark. Is that correct? He believed he was protecting me. Or perhaps, the lawyer suggested, he knew you would not be a credible partner in his endeavor. After all, you had no career of your own, no financial independence. By your own admission, you were entirely dependent on him." He let that hang in the air before continuing. "And now you sit here testifying against the very daughter who inherited the estate you believed should have been yours. Might it be, Mrs. Vance, that this testimony is less about facts and more about a mother's resentment, a woman's revenge?" "Objection." Martinez was on her feet. "Sustained," the judge said. "Move on, counselor." He spent the next hour picking at the edges of my story, questioning my memory of timelines, suggesting my perception might have been clouded by grief and stress. He was trying to build a narrative for the jury. This was a fragile, confused old woman, easily manipulated by her husband and lashing out in anger. I remained calm, answering each question with the simple, unadorned truth. "One final question," he said, turning to face the jury. "Given your unfamiliarity with firearms and the extreme stress of the situation, isn't it possible that you misinterpreted what you saw at the ranch? That what you perceived as an attempt on your life was in fact your daughter firing a warning shot, trying to scare away a person she believed to be an unstable, trespassing relative?" This was it, the moment I had prepared for. I turned my head and for the first time looked directly at my daughter. Her eyes, cold and empty, finally met mine. "My daughter," I said, my voice ringing with clarity in the silent courtroom, raised a pistol, aimed it at the center of my chest, and pulled the trigger. The bullet struck the truck I was diving behind at the exact height of my heart. If I had not moved in that precise second, I would be dead. I held her gaze. "Those are not the actions of a person firing a warning shot. Those are the actions of a person who has made a decision." Clara's facade finally irrevocably cracked. A flash of pure, frustrated rage contorted her features before she caught herself, but it was too late. The jury saw it. Her lawyer saw it. In that split second of unguarded hatred, my daughter had testified against herself more effectively than I ever could. "No further questions," the lawyer mumbled and sat down. As I walked from the stand, my legs steady, I did not look at the jury or the judge. I looked at the exit, but I could feel her eyes on my back. I felt the weight of Clara's gaze following my every step. It was no longer the hollow stare from before. It was something else, something sharp and focused. In her eyes, I sensed not just hatred, but a dawning, grudging reassessment. The weak, useless mother she had so casually dismissed had just sat before a federal court, and with quiet dignity become the instrument of her undoing. I knew in that moment she would never underestimate me again. Frank was waiting in the witness room, his face a torrent of emotions, pride, relief, and a deep shared sorrow. He didn't rush to me but simply stood as I entered, his eyes saying more than words ever could. "You were magnificent," he whispered as the door closed behind me. "It was the truth," I replied, the profound exhaustion of the day finally settling into my bones. Nothing more, nothing less. That evening, back in the sterile, anonymous hotel suite that served as our temporary home, the adrenaline of the day gave way to a bone-deep weariness. We ate a quiet dinner, the silence between us no longer tense, but heavy with unspoken grief. "Martinez says your testimony was devastating to their case," Frank said, breaking the quiet. "She said the jury was completely captivated, especially when you looked right at her." I set my fork down, my appetite gone. "It wasn't for them," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I had to look at her. I had to see for myself if there was anything left, any piece of the little girl I raised." "And," Frank asked gently, The dam broke. "She's gone, Richard." I said the words choked by a sob that tore through me. She is gone. The child we loved, the woman we thought we knew, she doesn't exist anymore. Maybe she never did. For the first time since this nightmare began, I allowed myself to truly grieve not for my husband, but for my daughter. It was a storm of racking, gut-wrenching sobs, a mourning for a loss more profound than death. Richard was beside me in an instant, not offering platitudes or reassurances, but simply putting his arm around my shaking shoulders, a solid grounding presence in the storm. I testified against my own baby. I wept into his shoulder. What kind of monster does that make me? It makes you a mother who chose the truth, he answered softly, his voice thick with emotion. A mother who couldn't save her child from herself, but who might save others from the consequences of her choices. It makes you the bravest person I know. We sat like that for a long time, my tears slowly subsiding the shared grief, a strange and powerful balm. It was not the easy comfort of our old life, but something new, something forged in trauma and tempered by survival. When I could finally speak again, I straightened up and wiped my eyes. "Tomorrow is your turn," I said. "Are you ready?" He nodded solemnly. "As much as I can be." He hesitated, then looked at me, his gaze direct and vulnerable. "I'd like you to be in the courtroom, Eleanor. If you can handle it, having you there, it would mean everything to me." It was the first time since his return that he had asked me for something not as a protector to his charge, but as a partner. It was a request that bridged 1,000 miles of the chasm between us. "I'll be there," I promised. The trial ground on for another month. Frank's testimony was a methodical, devastating account of the financial web Julian and Clara had woven, supported by a parade of forensic accountants and federal agents. The defense attorneys tried to paint him as a disgruntled old man and me as a scorned woman, but the mountain of evidence was insurmountable. The jury deliberated for less than 3 days. I was in the courtroom when they returned. Frank's hand found mine, our fingers lacing together as the foreperson stood. "Guilty. On all counts." A ripple went through the courtroom. When the judge handed down the sentences, life in prison for Julian, 27 years without parole for Clara, I felt a profound and unsettling emptiness. There was no victory, no relief, only loss. As they were led away in handcuffs, Clara turned. Her eyes, for one last suspended moment, found mine. I saw a flicker of something there. Something I couldn't name, not remorse, but perhaps a fleeting, ghostly recognition of the life, the family, the mother she had irrevocably destroyed. Then she looked away and was gone. After a final debriefing, we stood on the steps of the federal building, the cold winter air sharp on our faces. We were no longer witnesses under protection. We were no longer fugitives. We were simply free. "What now?" I asked, the question hanging in the vast, uncertain space before us. "That," Frank said, turning to face me, a tentative hope in his eyes, "is entirely up to us." Our financial assets had been unfrozen by the government. The sale of the Aspen House, a place neither of us could ever imagine setting foot in again, left us with substantial resources. We could go anywhere, be anyone. And yet when Frank asked me what I wanted, the answer that came to my lips surprised us both. "I want to go back to the cabin." And so we drove back into the heart of the Rockies, to the place where my old life had burned to the ground, and my new one had risen from the ashes. The government had repaired the damage from the containment protocol. The exterior was no longer a facade of neglect, but a handsome, sturdy mountain home. The steel shutters were gone, the broken windows replaced. Inside, I finally had the time and peace of mind to truly see it. I discovered the 1,000 thoughtful details Frank had woven into its design. The kitchen layout, with a large island and a breakfast nook overlooking the valley, was the one I had sketched on a napkin years ago. The library was filled not just with books, but with first editions of my favorite authors. And at the very back of the house, with a wall of windows that faced the sunrise, was a fully equipped art studio. An easel stood waiting with a set of professional-grade paints and brushes and stacks of fresh, untouched canvases. I remembered with a pang how I used to paint before marriage and motherhood had consumed my time. He had remembered a passion I had long since abandoned. This was always the endgame, Frank admitted as we stood in the studio, the afternoon light streaming in. For me to finish the investigation, and then for us to disappear here together and be safe. He sighed, the sound heavy with regret. Things did not go according to plan. No, I agreed, running a hand over the smooth wood of the easel. But sometimes what happens instead is what needed to happen all along. We spent that week at the cabin, the silence between us slowly transforming from a tense quiet to a comfortable one. We learned the rhythms of the house, the way the light moved across the rooms throughout the day. On our last evening, we sat on the porch bundled in heavy blankets against the biting cold, watching snow begin to fall, each flake a tiny ghost in the twilight. I think I could be happy here, I said, my breath a white cloud in the air. After everything that happened here, he asked, his voice cautious. This is the one place that isn't tainted, I explained. The house in Aspen holds the ghost of Claire's betrayal. Every memory there is now a lie. But this place? This is where I learned I could survive. It's where I found a strength I never knew I had. It seems a fitting place to build a new life on that foundation. What would that life look like? He asked. The question was open, gentle, with no assumptions. Different, I said honestly, turning to face him. I am not the same woman, Frank. I cannot go back to being a silent partner in the background of my own life. I would never want you to, he replied, his voice earnest. I fell in love with that woman 45 years ago. But I am in awe of the woman you are now. The simple, sincere words warmed me more than the blanket. I said, the ideas taking shape as I spoke them. I would like to use that art studio. And I'd like to call Martha, see if she needs help rebuilding. And maybe I'll volunteer at the library in town. Help people who are starting over after difficult times. I have some experience with that now. He smiled, a real genuine smile that reached his eyes. You would be wonderful at it. We sat in a comfortable silence as the snow fell thicker, blanketing the mountains in a pristine, forgiving white. The future was still an unknown country. The scars from Clara's betrayal would never fully fade, and the trust between Frank and me was a sapling, not a deep-rooted tree. But as the snowflakes danced in the warm glow of the porch light, I felt something I had thought was lost to me forever. Hope. Not the naive optimism of my youth, but something harder, truer. The quiet confidence of a woman who had walked through the fire and emerged not unscathed, but whole. I said, finally reaching for his hand under the blanket, that this is where we're meant to be. His fingers found mine, warm and solid. Together. The single word was a question, an offering, and an apology all in one. Together, I confirmed, giving his hand a squeeze. Not as we were, but as we are now. Around us, the snow continued to fall, covering the old tracks, erasing the past, offering a clean white canvas on which to create whatever came next. And for the first time in a very long time, I was ready to pick up the brush. If this story of betrayal and rebirth resonated with you, and if you believe in the power of finding your own strength when you've been underestimated, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell for more stories of survival and justice. And in the comments below, tell us about a time you discovered a strength you never knew you had. Your story could be the hope someone else needs to see today.